Hello everyone, and welcome to this on-demand webinar on how to scale your business with government. My name is James, and today we're going to be running through the key lessons we like to impart on our clients on how they can expand their business in the public sector. The public sector is an ever-expanding, very important market, but admittedly it is fraught with pitfalls and common mistakes that lots of suppliers make. So we're going to be running through our top tips on how to avoid those, how to expand your business with government and win more contracts. So to run through what we're going to be talking about today, first we're going to cover what the typical supplier who these lessons tend to apply to looks like. Then we'll be running through our 5 key lessons for the webinar. That is reframing your USPs, understanding your market through rich data, building a rich, actionable sales pipeline, tailoring your bids to your prospects, and finally, properly harnessing framework agreements. If you have any questions that come up throughout the webinar, don't hesitate to put them in the comments or email us at contact@tussell.com. So without further ado, let's get going. So what we wanted to do first is quickly run through essentially what kind of suppliers came to mind when we thought about making this webinar. At Tussell, we work with a lot of different companies of all different sizes, strategic suppliers, up-and-coming SMEs, all of them in between. But a lot of them make the same kind of mistakes when they're wanting to first breach into the public sector and start to win more work. So this is sort of the common characteristics we see between businesses that are just getting started. So firstly, you probably have a few contract wins under your belt already, or you've just won your first contract. You know the public sector are probably in demand for the kind of things you're selling. You just want to find out how to make those next contract wins more, just easier to get, less time intensive and bigger and better than they were before. Next up, you probably don't have an actual sort of fully dedicated public sector sales force or salesperson. More or less when it comes to tender opportunities, you probably take it as more of a team effort that you will pitch in and do, rather than having, say, a single salesperson whose whole territory is just selling the public sector. Next up, you probably have quite limited market intelligence. The sort of understanding of your market is probably based just on a very manual trawling through of individual tender platforms and contract platforms. And so your intelligence as to what your market in the public sector actually looks like is probably quite sporadic and all over the place, and you mostly rely on anecdotal information, what you've heard from other colleagues, from other suppliers, but in essence is still quite limited. And finally, as a sort of result of all 3 of those things, you don't actually really have a concerted strategy as to how you want to expand and scale in the public sector. As I said, you probably know that the public sector in demand of the things you're selling and that people have sold it in before, but in terms of who you're going to go out for, who you're going to target, what routes to market to use, who you're going to be up against, that strategy isn't really in place, and in essence, that's why you want to be watching a webinar like this. So the reason for going over all of that is not to belittle or sort of degrade your current public sector sales strategy or the work you're doing in the public sector, but it's more to actually reassure you that lots of other suppliers are also making common mistakes like these, and sort of those characteristics apply across the board. And in essence, it's not to feel like you're doing something wrong. It's a new learning experience entering the public sector. And there's lots to learn, and that's what we're going to be covering today in this webinar. So as a means of addressing those sort of common characteristics and common pitfalls, there's 2 key lessons that you should basically go into the public sector with. Firstly, it's that you need to realize selling to government is an entirely different beast to selling to the private sector. Fundamentally, the routes to market you actually access the public sector with, the kind of language the public sector use, their priorities are very fundamentally different to the private sector. And as I said, that means there's a lot of lesson learning to do, and you need to be open and willing to learn, what you're doing wrong, how you can improve, and essentially reorient all of your unique selling points, your tactics for the public sector versus the private sector. So it's acknowledging that it's a very different beast first and foremost. But secondly, and perhaps a bit paradoxically, selling to the public sector, you shouldn't lose sight of the basics of selling. It is selling to a different market entirely, but at the end of the day, it is still selling. So what we particularly have in mind when we say that is a lot of companies, when they try to sell to the public sector, actually lose sight of things like having adequate market intelligence, for example, actually understanding what your public sector market looks like in the first place. There's a bit of sort of disconnect between when that move between the private and public sector happens. A lot of companies actually lose sight of what it means to effectively sell in the first place. So sort of paradoxically, you've got to first realize the differences between the public and private sector, but at the same time, don't lose sight as to what good, effective sales strategies and actual scaling looks like. So what does this look like in practice? So our 5 key lessons that we try to impart and teach our clients when it comes to scaling in the public sector is first the importance of reframing your USPs in line with public sector. understanding your market, building a rich and actionable sales pipeline, tailoring your bids, and finally, properly harnessing framework agreements. If you start to adopt these lessons and start to incorporate them into your sales strategies, how you pitch to public sector, we are very confident that you'll start to increase your business with government and start to scale quite effectively. So without further ado, let's go into the first tip. So firstly, it's the importance of reframing your unique selling points alongside the public sector. As said, there is a fundamental difference between selling to the private versus the public sector. I think a lot of companies just innately assume and just don't even question the fact that when you move into the public sector market, you need to also reorient how you are messaging and how you're talking to your clients, because at the end of the day, they are operating on very fundamental different sort of principles. That being, the public sector primarily exists to serve citizens, to better their experiences, to make sure that key sort of institutions and services are running effectively and efficiently. Whereas the private sector, at the end of the day, these companies want to make more money. So you've got to keep that in mind, that you can't apply your same messaging between the private and the public sector. You need to keep those different fundamentals in mind. That being said, there are obviously going to be some overlaps in what the private and public sector care about. So for example, they want to achieve their respective goals at a more cost-effective way. They also want to train their staff. They want to make sure that they're working more efficiently, that their organizational processes are as good as can be. And they ultimately, they want to achieve their targets at the end of the day. So it's about understanding where do your unique selling points fit within that sort of those public sector principles. What do they want to achieve? Rather than using the same old language you've been using in the private sector, but instead tweak it for the public sector. So what kind of questions can you be asking yourself to help reorient your USPs towards the public sector? So firstly, is the public sector actually in need of your goods and services? You may think that you have the most amazing offering in the world and that everyone will love it, but fundamentally you need to do a bit of soul-searching and ask, okay, the private sector may really love what we offer, but is it something that's going to resonate in the public sector? Are they actually going to want what we are selling? Secondly, so if you think that you are in fact in demand in the public sector, you need to ask yourself, how are you solving some of their fundamental problems, not the private sector's problems, the public sector's problems. So specifically, are your goods and services actually improving the lives of residents and the operations of authorities? And finally, a sort of way to reassure that this is something that your products and services are actually in demand, that it's something the public sector is used to buying. Have a look through past data, past contracts, past tenders to see if this is something the public sector has actually bought before, actually has experience buying before. So you've now reoriented your unique selling points towards the public sector. You're speaking a slightly different language, targeting the kind of key problems the public sector tends to have. The next question is then, so how do we actually get that message out there? Who are we targeting and what sort of routes are we going to use to do that? So fundamentally, what does our market look like? And as I said before, there seems to be quite a lot of disconnect when companies first enter the public sector marketplace, in that they don't apply the principle of sort of basic market intelligence and basic market research and trying to understand the public sector market, primarily because the data actually isn't out there or sort of is not as readily available to understand your market. But we'll get into reasons why that is in a moment. So let's say, for example, you are a sort of mobile software developer. You have an offering that you think the public sector is going to like. What kind of questions should you be fundamentally asking yourself to develop a strategy to expand into this market? So first and foremost, who's already buying our sort of mobile software services in essence? Is it a particular area of government? Is it central, local government? Is it particular councils? Is it a particular central government authorities? Is it regional based? All very important things to understand, to know who you're going to be targeting. Second, who are you likely going to be coming up against, i.e. who are the players already in this market who you're likely going to be competing against when it comes to bidding on tenders and whatnot. It's very important you know who you're going to be up against. As with any good sales strategy, you need to be pitching your wares against how you are stronger than your competitors, their weaknesses, etc., etc. Thirdly, what's already being procured? Your software offering may be very similar to what's already been offered on the market before, or maybe something that's very new to the market and has not been procured before, and that's quite important to know when it comes to how to pitch it, how to explain it to prospects. Fourth, is the demand for your kind of services actually growing or is it slowing? If it's slowing, it may be an indication that maybe is now not the best time to expand in the public sector. If you can see there's a very clear drop-off in demand for your services, Whereas if it's expanding, obviously this is a very good time to expand to the market. So it's a good indication as to whether your time and energy is best actually served in the public sector, or maybe you should stay in the private sector. And finally, which routes to market actually being used to procure those software services, i.e. are there framework agreements that are being used particularly to procure them? Maybe it's best you actually partner up with a larger organization if they are sort of very dominant in this space. Again, it's about understanding where are your resources most effectively put, which routes should you be harnessing to actually access the public sector. As it's not as simple always as just winning a contract. There are often different ways of getting there. It's just knowing which one is best for you. So it's all very well and good asking those questions as to what does our market look like, who's buying our services, etc. But as I alluded to earlier, a reason why a lot of companies don't ask those questions or can't answer those questions is because the data to answer them just isn't out there in a very easily accessible, sort of malleable way. So if you were to gather this market intelligence to start answering those questions, where could you look? The simple answer is there's an alternative between very manually trawling through sort of procurement portals and tender portals online. For example, if you want to look at central government contracts, you can look at places like Find a Tender, Contracts Finder. If you want to go more sort of to the devolved level, you can look at places like Public Contract Scotland, CELTA Wales, for those different sort of devolved areas. Or more specifically, you can actually dig down into individual sort of regional procurement portals. A lot of particularly larger councils tend to actually run their own portals, which you can also dig into. So you can very manually look through all of those different portals, try to cobble together some kind of view of your target market, who's buying what, who's selling to who. But this is a very manual process and a very resource-intensive process. Whereas an alternative is using a market intelligence platform, which enhances and aggregates all of this data together into one place. So in essence, you don't need to do it yourself. It's already all put together for you. So as a way to illustrate what kind of the power of a more aggregated view of your market looks like, I've quickly gone into the Tussell platform itself, and we're going to use the example of trying to understand what the digital transformation market looks like. As I said, using this more aggregated view. So we go into the sector search tab on Tussell. We go into the saved search for digital transformation. And what this view will be showing is all of the contract awards that have some kind of digital transformation related keyword attached to them. That is £25 billion worth of opportunities. We then go down to contracts that have only been awarded in the last 24 months to get a more recent view of what the market looks like. Filter that down again to local government. And let's say we just want to look at councils in the east of England. So what we're viewing here is all contracts that were awarded in the last 24 months related to digital transformation awarded by councils in the east of England, which as you can see is worth £9.24 million. What we can then do is break that down by saying, okay, which buyers are actually awarding those contracts, i.e. who should we be targeting in this market, in this region? As we can see by value, the highest contracting authority is Southend-on-Sea, and the authority that has awarded the most of these contracts by volume is again Southend-by-Sea, but under that has become Essex County Council. We can then look at which suppliers are actually on the receiving end of those contracts, who's actually winning them, and we can see the likes of Unit or Business, Liquid Logic, by contract award value, and then we can see the suppliers which have won the most contracts by volume are the likes of Granicus, Step, Civica, etc. And finally, we can take a look at which frameworks we use to procure those contracts by these local authorities in the east of England. And we can see the highest by value is Data and Application Solutions, followed by G-Cloud 12. So hopefully that illustrates a bit more clearly the power of a more aggregated sort of data picture when it comes to market analysis in the public sector, rather than sort of trawling through individual portals. Instead, you can use a market intelligence platform that sort of aggregates all of that together and helps answer those 5 fundamental questions in just a few clicks rather than days and days of research in essence. So you have a understanding of your market, you know how your USPs align with the public sector. The next is actually building out a very rich, actionable pipeline of opportunities that you can start to work towards. But first, let's reflect a bit on how a lot of companies typically approach building pipelines in the public sector, because it's, at the end of the day, is not a very effective process and could be done a lot better. So does this look familiar to you? You are sitting around on your computer, looking at your emails, and then suddenly you get pinged over a new tender for a contract which you've on some public portal that you signed up for, and you get very excited and you think, wow, great, it's time to bid on this tender. This, as I said, is what a lot of companies do, and it's fine. A lot of companies win contracts in this way, but ultimately is not the most effective way of reacting to opportunities and ultimately scaling your business with government. So what are the problems with this, what I like to call reactive approach to bidding in the public sector? So let's say this is the first time you've bid on a tender with any given contracting authority. You've got the tender alert and you've decided to build out your bid. Well, the problem is the buyer may not very well know who you are if this is your first time bidding on them, and they only just get to know about you when it comes to the actual bidding stage. You haven't had any opportunity to flag yourself to them, and it's going to be essentially a shot in the dark in essence. Second, you won't have built strong relationships with the key decision makers behind the procurement process. Again, if you're only starting to talk to them when it comes to the immediate bidding stage, you're not going to know who they are really, what their sort of struggles are. You won't build any sort of personal connection with them. Again, that's not going to help you when it comes to winning the contract. Third, if you've only just sort of become aware of a contract via the tender that's been released to re-tender that contract, you won't probably know how the current contract went, or maybe even why it's being re-tendered. You won't know, for example, how well the current supplier is doing. You won't know if any issues came up, if they did really well, essentially the backstory of the tender, if there is one. And that will essentially not provide you with the correct context you need to make a much more compelling bid. And finally, you're simply just going to be time constrained if all the time you have to build out a compelling bid, to get to know the contracting authority, to get to know how the contract is going, if all that time is condensed into the bidding time itself, which can be as limited as a few weeks or a month, you're just going to be very time constrained and rushed, and you're probably not going to make as compelling a bid as you could if you'd had a longer lead time. So those are the reasons why you shouldn't just be reacting to tenders as and when they come out, but instead you should try to build a longer term pipeline of opportunities and anticipate them well before the tender actually gets released. So what should you be doing instead, and what does that actually look like in practice? So for example, let's say you do your market research diligently, you're looking ahead, you know that there's a 65 grand opportunity coming up with Manchester City Council just before the end of 2024, another larger one with Lancashire County Council just after the new year, another 100 grand contract with Cornwall Council midway through 2024, and then a very chunky 750 grand contract with the Department of Transport just into 2025. Now that you have that sort of pipeline of opportunities that are coming up, and you have that lead time before they're likely going to renew and a new tender is going to come out, you can start to do lots of things around preparing for that tender and then in turn making a more compelling bid. What does that mean in practice? So with that added lead time, with that sales pipeline you developed, you can do things like actually get to know the contracting authority, get to know their common pain points, the common issues they're running into, and more specifically getting to know the actual people who are going to be running that procurement, who are going to be reading your bid, getting to know them more personally. It all helps to build a stronger relationship. They look on you more favorably, essentially. Second, and as part of the first point, attend events with them. So, it's all well and good doing your research on their websites and whatnot to try and understand the key pain points, but actually sort of physically going to events that they're either running or they're attending can be a very good way to, again, build relationships with the key decision makers behind the tender, get to know their pain points, etc. Third, track the current contract's progression. If it's likely that this contract is going to be one that's going to come up for renewal, especially service-related contracts, you can do research into how that contract is going. Again, getting in contact with the authority, getting to know the people behind those contracts and asking them, how is it going? How are the current suppliers doing? Are there any problems? And again, you can use that intelligence to build a more compelling bid that really resonates with the sort of issues that may have arose during the contract's lifetime. And finally, all this sort of, personal connections built up, all this intelligence built up, you can actually build a more strategic approach as to how you're going to write your bid, make it more compelling, and stand a better chance of winning the contract when the tender actually comes out. So it's all very well and good saying these sort of aspirations as to getting to know the contracting authority and the people behind them, but how ultimately do you know when the contract is going to be coming up for renewal, when the tenders are likely going to be published? Again, it's likely going to be a very sort of manual process of going on to places like Find a Tender, Contracts Finder, and manually trawling through the individual contracts and seeing the end date as to when they're going to expire, and then building a pipeline manually off the back of that. Quite usefully, larger contracting authorities, typically major ministerial departments, have started more and more to publish their procurement pipelines online in sort of Excel format. Again, that's a sort of ready list of pipeline opportunities, but again, that does require you to actually then go and download all of them in turn and sort of aggregate them into something that's more useful than just an Excel sheet. Alternatively, again, you could turn to a more aggregated market view like the Tussell platform. Unlike open data, which often you'll find has lots of missing end dates as to when contracts are going to come to an end, because unfortunately, some procurement teams aren't the best at actually filling in all the data they need regarding each contract. We've actually manually filled out 19% more contract end dates versus open data, worth £160 billion worth of contracts. So if you want to make sure you're not missing out on those pipeline opportunities, you need to use the likes of Tussell to get the aggregated view as to when opportunities are going to be coming up in your pipeline. Lesson number 4, similar to the misconception that you can just transfer your private sector unique selling points over to the public sector, there's an underlying misconception that when you do that, you can apply that public sector messaging to all contracting authorities with sort of a blanket approach that all of them will just resonate with it to the same extent. This isn't true. You shouldn't do this. What applies to one authority in one area may not even resonate with a neighbouring authority. You need to put the effort in to really tailor your bids towards what resonates with those particular contracting authorities at a given time. So what do I actually mean by this? Let's say you offer a payment system software solution and you want to start selling it to the public sector. There are these 3 local authorities that may be in need of a new payment system, but each of them are prioritizing different elements of this solution. The Green Authority is looking for one which offers good value for money. They want something that's not going to break the bank, essentially. The Blue Authority is looking for something which can be delivered very rapidly and sort of integrated into their systems very quickly. And finally, the Pink Authority, they value user experience the most. They might have a very large finance team who they just want to ensure can use the new system from the get-go. They don't need lots of training, for example. Each of these authorities, with their current system, also spend different amounts annually on their subscription, for example. So the Green Authority, they spend about 10 grand a year. The Blue Authority spend about 30 grand. And the Pink Authority, maybe they're a bit larger, they spend 75 grand a year on this system. Finally, each of the contracting authorities also gets their current system from a different supplier. The Green gets it from one, the Blue from another, and the Pink from another. In essence, they each have their unique experiences with these systems, what they like, what they dislike, how their relationship with the supplier is developed. Each of them, in essence, have a different story to tell with their current system. So as you can see, each of these authorities has a different priority when it comes to this payment system. They're each expecting to spend different amounts for it, and they have different experiences with their current system. The problem is if you go in with the approach that, say, all of these councils are going to value user experience, they're all willing to spend about 30, 40 grand on this, and you're tailoring your messaging towards just one of these suppliers in the market, you're actually not going to be resonating with any of these authorities fully, because your blanket approach just isn't hitting what they know, what they experience, and what they're expecting. With each bid, what you need to do is understand the unique needs and nuances of each prospect. Just don't take a blanket approach and presume that your messaging for one authority or for one entire sort of kind of authority is going to resonate with each in turn. You need to dig into each individually. How do you go about actually getting to know what the contracting authorities want and their sort of individual problems? Part of this is a qualitative research process. Unfortunately, it's probably quite a time-intensive process. But when it comes to tailoring your bids, doing this research is really, really key to making your bids really stick and resonate. So what kind of things can you be looking at? So firstly, you can look at documents like procurement strategies published by each contracting authority. You can usually find them somewhere on their websites. These documents will run through the sort of overarching priorities for procurement and commissioning at that authority. Like, for example, do they really value for money offerings, for example? Next, if you really want to get into the weeds of what's being said day to day about contracts and sort of their pain points relating to them or what we're expecting from upcoming procurements, you can actually look at the meeting minutes of, say, the procurement group within the council or the contracting authority, see what they're saying day to day about their experiences and what they want. Next, you can look at broader strategy documents or policy documents. Again, like the procurement strategies, these give a very sort of broad indication as to what direction the authority wants to go in. And again, helping you to tailor your messaging towards, if they have key objectives, so they're using certain terminologies a lot, then incorporate that into your bid. Finally, and perhaps most boring of all, is actually taking the time to really comb through the tender itself. You may presume you know what the contracting authority is after because you've seen lots of tenders like this before for other contracting authorities, but it is really important that you actually comb through line by line the tender to see exactly what they're after, making sure a bid really resonates with those individual requirements. Don't just presume you know what they want. Often you'll be quite surprised. So that's the kind of quantitative angle you can take to try and understand the needs, nuances and problems being experienced by the contracting authority you're bidding with via sort of online documentation and whatnot. But there's also a more quantitative angle you can take, which I'll illustrate through the Tussell platform. So continuing with the example of the digital transformation market, we've got our keywords put in. And let's say we have a tender that we want to bid on with Leeds City Council. We want to see what they've already awarded in the digital transformation sector in the recent past. So here we're putting in, looking at just contracts that have been awarded since 2016 by Leeds City Council in this sector. We can see they've awarded 24 contracts worth £5.5 million related to digital transformation. We can then click into their supplier rankings to understand essentially who are we likely to be coming up against when bidding on these contracts. And as we can see, the overwhelming number of contracts and their value have been awarded to Bytes Software Services. So we know that when we are writing our bids, we need to have them in mind. How do we, stack up against them? And then if we want to, we can look at the individual contracts that have been awarded to Bytes to get a better sense of what work have they already done, how embedded are they, what are they used to doing with Leeds, and then build off our bid based off that knowledge. Finally, the area that probably garners the most attention from new and existing suppliers alike is how you can be winning more work through framework agreements, how you can be doing that more effectively. Framework agreements are often viewed as sort of this silver bullet for winning work in the public sector. Once you're on them, you're almost guaranteed work, as it were. But unfortunately, this isn't the case, and a lot of suppliers are left very disappointed once they spend all this time applying for frameworks, they get onto one, and the work isn't landing in their lap. And quickly, we're going to go over why that is and what you can be doing to remedy that. So just a quick reminder, what actually are framework agreements and how do they work? Essentially, they are a pre-approved sort of preferred supplier list. So in this example, we have a framework orienting around fire alarms, which is divided into 3 individual lots, which almost operate as sort of mini frameworks within the framework. One about supplying fire alarms, another one about repairing them, and finally one testing them. In this example, 3 different suppliers managed to get onto a framework, and each of them were offered access to the different lots respectively. So supplier 1 and 2 can both win work in lots 1 and 2, supply and repair, and supplier 3, quite handily for them, is the only supplier in lot 3, so they can in essence expect to win all of the work that is being procured via lot 3 on this framework. Contracts can either be awarded directly via a framework, or they can go through what is called a mini competition, which is essentially a full tender process but limited just to the suppliers on that framework. So let's say, for this example, you've got onto this fire alarms framework, you're excited, you think you're going to be winning lots of sort of exclusive work via this framework, but what you come to find is actually you're not winning any work, or perhaps worse, there's actually no opportunities coming through this framework, and you're sat there kind of twiddling your thumbs thinking, why did we go through all this effort to apply for this framework? There's quite a few reasons why this could be happening. First reason is that you may have been sold the sort of dream that via the fire alarms framework, you're going to be winning lots of work, where lots of buyers know about it and going to be using it. In reality, a lot of buyers actually prefer using this alternative framework called the fire safety framework, which is where a lot of work is actually going, whereas you're just sort of left behind in essence. Another reason is that you may not have known this framework's been going on for quite a while, and that there's another supplier on it who's actually winning all the work and who you've been known to fiercely compete against. So they may be winning all the work and you're sort of again left behind. And finally, and you'll be surprised how common this actually is, buyers may not actually be aware that this fire alarms framework exists in the first place. They may very well like it if they did know it existed, but they actually aren't aware it exists at all. So instead they continue just running their own tender processes for fire alarms, and you're again left behind wondering, where is my work? So addressing this disappointment with frameworks essentially breaks down into 2 steps. First, before you actually get onto a framework, you need to choose the right ones that are likely going to actually win you work, and not just what you've been told are really great and anecdotally you've heard good things about. You need to use hard data to help you decide which frameworks are likely going to win you more business. Second, once you've actually made it onto a framework, you then need to make the most of that framework. Again, don't just presume the work's going to land in your lap. You need to proactively make the most of it while you're on it. And we'll explain how to do that in just a moment. So what does it look like using data to help you decide which framework's actually going to help you win more business? Again, I'll be using Tussell to illustrate this, specifically because Tussell is one of a few platforms that has actually manually matched which call-off contracts have been awarded via which frameworks, therefore giving you very rich insights into not which frameworks are being said to award work, but which frameworks are actually being used to award what specific work. So we're going to stick with the digital transformation market as our example. We've got all of our keywords built out, and we're going to filter by contracts that were just awarded in the last 24 months to give a sort of recent picture of which frameworks are being used. Next, we go over to the frameworks ranking tab. And as we can see, over the last 24 months, 70 different frameworks were used to award digital transformation related contracts worth £1.3 billion. We can then order all of these frameworks by which have been used to award digital transformation contracts the most by volume. And as we can see, perhaps not so surprisingly, it's G-Cloud 12 and DOS. Next, let's say you want to find out which frameworks your target accounts are using to award work in your sector or just generally. In this example, let's say we want to see which frameworks the Department for Work and Pensions are using and which contracts they've awarded via them in the last 24 months. As you can see, they've awarded in total 940 contracts. Of all of those, 722 were call-offs from a contract worth £4.3 billion, and the most commonly used was the commercial agreement for provision of employment and health-related services by value. Then if we wanted to filter by those which were used most frequently, we can see again was G-Cloud 12 and DOS. And finally, let's say you wanted to see the hard data behind which frameworks your key competitors or partners are using to win work in the public sector. In this example, we're going to use Byte Software, and we'll see which contracts they've been awarded in the last 24 months, filtering for those that are just identified as call-off contracts. As we can see, both by the value of contracts awarded and the volume of contracts awarded, Byte Software is very heavily using technology products and associated services to win work in the public sector. So that's how you use hard data to decide which frameworks are going to be winning you work in the public sector. But then once you've actually decided which ones to apply for and get onto, how do you actually make sure you're getting the most of those framework agreements? For us, this sort of framework strategy breaks down into three fundamental components. The first component of this is having a comms strategy once you get onto the framework. What does this mean? Let it be known you're actually on the framework. Don't presume that buyers know you're on it. You're not the center of their world, unfortunately. You need to have some kind of comms strategy, either via your website or social media, to let them know, hey, you can award work and work with us via this framework agreement. To make your framework more appealing to potential buyers, you should publish things like case studies and landing pages on your website to essentially illustrate how easy it is to procure work via this framework and the kind of the good work you've done already via the framework. Second, help potential customers actually use your framework. What does this mean? Educate them on how to actually gain access to and procure work through your framework. Again, don't presume that all contracting authorities and all procurement teams are very well versed in framework agreements. They often need a bit of education as to how to use the framework because each are different and how they can award work through it and gain access to it. You should also educate them why it's a good route to market, how they can save time and resources by using your framework agreement rather than, say, going through a full tender process themselves. And finally, give real-world examples of the kind of work that has been awarded via your framework, and again, why that's a good reason for them to also start using your framework to get similar work done. Finally, a quite long-term strategic approach to frameworks is that if you know you're going to probably be using this framework a lot in the future, is to build a relationship with the procurement team behind the framework itself. So what does this look like in practice? Like I said, you can use your social media channels and your website to start co-promoting the framework agreement together. You can direct potential customers to the framework, let them know it exists, let them know it's a good route to market. Again, building up good rapport and relations with our procurement team. And finally, you can schedule regular catch-ups and discussions with procurement teams to let them know how you're finding the framework. Are there any common difficulties you're running into? How the buyers who are using it are finding it? So in the future, when the framework goes to be released again, can it be tweaked in some way to make it more effective and efficient for everyone involved? So those are our 5 key lessons of how to scale your business with government. Reframing your USPs from the private sector to the public sector, understanding your market of rich, actionable intelligence, building a sales pipeline that's likely to convert and using that as a means to get ahead of opportunities and build your case, tailoring your biz to the specific needs and problems of each individual contracting authority, and finally, properly harnessing frameworks, both by using data to decide which ones to get onto, and then having a concerted strategy when you're actually on them to win more work. With all of these lessons in mind, you're going to be able to resonate better with buyers and potential customers. You're going to know where you can focus your resources and really focus your energies. You're going to be able to get ahead of opportunities and build better relationships in the public sector. You're going to build more compelling winning bids, and you're going to be ultimately, hopefully, winning more work through framework agreements. As a reminder, appreciate the complexities of selling in the public sector. It is very different to selling to the private sector, but take that in your stride, be open to new lessons and new ways of working, and you'll be in good stead to start scaling your business. But again, don't lose sight of the basics when it comes to things like building intelligence on your market, understanding your customers' needs, and understanding which routes to market are most effective for your business. Throughout this webinar, you likely noticed I was dipping in and out of Tussell's market intelligence platform. Our customers are using our platform to address all 5 of these lessons we ran through because we aggregate all publicly available information on public tendering, spending, contracting frameworks, etc. So you can have this pool of information ready to make more informed business decisions in the public sector. If you want to learn more about the Tussell platform, just hop on over to tussell.com, or you can give us an email on contact@tussell.com. We have lots more educational content like this on our YouTube channel, so go check that out. You can also check out all the new content we're coming out with on our LinkedIn and Twitter pages, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter where we send out all of this stuff directly to your inbox via our website. If you have any questions about any of the topics we covered today, leave a comment below or give us an email. I've been James. Hope you found this useful. Catch you next time.